The gods and goddesses of Olympus are a topic that I've rarely discussed on this channel, and if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't really know why I've put them off for so long. So as we continue our journey into Greek mythology, it is the goddess Demeter that we will be examining today. So starting with her name, there are a few ways it can be pronounced depending on how authentic you want to sound. The English translation is quite simply Demeter, but as a general rule of thumb, if a word has been translated from Greek into English and now begins with the letter D, the way it's pronounced in Greek will differ. The D sound is often replaced by TH, or what sounds like the. Demeter in Greek is pronounced Demeter, with the emphasis placed on the second E and the me in meter. Demeter was of course one of the original 6 Olympians to be born from the Titaness Rhea, and then swallowed by Cronus, her father. Once released and with her father defeated, Demeter would then go on to become quite a key figure in the lives of the ancient Greek people as the goddess of the grain. This not only included agriculture and the harvest, but also nourishment and growth of the earth and humanity. The ancient Greeks had the belief that the overall fertility of the earth was down to Demeter, and because of this several cults formed in Demeter's name in order to honour the goddess and to show their gratitude, but also to ensure that the earth remained fertile because it did directly affect their food supply. The cult of Ceto, or Sitho, referred to the goddess as she of the grain, because the ancient Greeks believed that it was through Demeter they were given food and grain. The second of Demeter's cults that was known for its annual festival was the Thesmophoria, which mainly focused on Demeter and her daughter Persephone. It was fairly common practice for men to be completely forbidden from attending this festival, and even just seeing or hearing about the events that took place was frowned upon. The women of Demeter's cult kept their secrets quite secret. The festival itself took place during the end of summer, close to the harvest period, and it would last for several days. Now as to what exactly took place during this festival, we don't really know, but there are some accounts that suggest that special pigs were sacrificed and placed into pits known as megara. The pigs' entrails, along with cakes and bread baked in the shapes of serpents and phalluses, would then be placed on altars dedicated to Demeter and her daughter. So the yearly routine for a Greek woman who was part of Demeter's cult involved killing some pigs, throwing them in a pit, and then baking some penis cake, which I do find quite amusing because penis-shaped cakes are something that we normally see around bridal parties and birthday parties, unless they've been secretly worshipping Demeter this whole time and we just never knew about it. In that case, we've just uncovered the penis cake conspiracy. Or maybe I just like saying penis cake. I don't really know. Anyway, I digress, enough talk about cake. This festival was one of the most widely celebrated across ancient Greece because of how integral Demeter was to the survival of the ancient Greek people. The risk of anger in Demeter was far too great, and we will discuss what exactly the goddess was capable of a bit later on in the video. Over the years, Demeter had numerous consorts, which in turn resulted in numerous children. The most well known of these being Persephone, who was fathered by Zeus and who I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. One of the lesser discussed relations was with Iasos, the son of Zeus, and the nymph Electra. When attending the marriage of Cadmus and Harmonia, Demeter lured him away from the celebrations and into a field, where the two would enjoy the sunset and roam around in the field, counting sheep, and I'm kidding, they just had sex. When they did eventually return to the celebrations, the back of Demeter's dress was covered in mud, because that is what happens if you choose to roll around in a field. Now this in itself wouldn't have been much of a problem, but it was spotted by Zeus, who had guessed what had happened, and who reacted out of anger and jealousy. Or maybe it was out of boredom and pleasure. No one really knows of Zeus because he just does whatever he wants whenever he pleases. Regardless of why he chose to do so, he then proceeded to strike down Iasos with a single bolt of lightning. Demeter did however have his twin sons, Plutos the god of wealth and Philomenos the god of agriculture and husbandry. There are some tales of Demeter that go all the way back to the Bronze Age. Around the same time we have the first accounts of people speaking Greek. These tales would associate Demeter with Poseidon rather than Zeus. In these somewhat primitive stories, Poseidon was seen as a water spirit who appeared as a horse that would pursue Demeter, who appeared as a mare. Now for some of you this story may sound familiar, and that's because it is quite similar to the story of Nemesis and Zeus. Demeter, wanting to avoid Poseidon, transformed herself into her ancient form, which was that of a mare, but Poseidon then transformed himself into a stallion in order to mate with the goddess. She would then bore Poseidon several children. Despina, or Thespina, the goddess of mysteries, who was a central figure of the Eleusinian mysteries. The simplest way to describe the Eleusinian mysteries is as the initiation process held annually for those who wish to join the cult of Demeter and Persephone. Despina would often appear alongside her mother during these trials, as the mistress whose real name would only be revealed to those initiated into the cult of her mother or her very own Arcadian cult. Demeter and her daughter would often be seen as the two great goddesses of Arcadia, but this daughter was later replaced by Persephone in the years that followed. The second child of Poseidon and Demeter was Arion, a swift divine horse with the gift of speech, who appears in a work of Homer as the horse of King Adrestus of Argos. There is no man that shall catch thee by a burst of speed, neither pass thee by, nay, Not enough in pursuit, he were driving godly Arion, the swift horse of Adrestus that was of heavenly stock. These were just some of Demeter's children who were mentioned by more than just name. She was said to have had no less than 9 children with Triptolemus, the threefold warrior, and several more with the titan Oceanus. Having already discussed some of Demeter's lesser known children, I'm sure many of you are waiting to hear about one in particular, the daughter that she had with Zeus, and the child that she arguably had the strongest connection with, Persephone. For the most part, Persephone is seen as the queen of the underworld, but as a young woman she was the goddess of springtime, flowers, and vegetation, all things that we can link back to her mother, so it's no real surprise that they spent most days together and formed a very close connection. The issue then arose when Hades fell in love with Persephone and Demeter would not bless their marriage, because to her Persephone was a beacon of life, and to be surrounded by the dead in Hades was not a future that she wished for her daughter. It's fairly difficult to say with any certainty whether her reaction here was a manifestation of her feelings towards her brother Hades, or rather her own personal desire for her daughter to experience life to its fullest, and not to be condemned to an eternity in the underworld. Regardless of Demeter's concerns, Zeus had already promised Hades one of his daughters as a bride, and Hades had indeed chosen Persephone. Knowing that Demeter would never willingly allow Persephone to join Hades in the underworld, the two brothers hatched a plan, which in most cases ended with Persephone being abducted when she was separated from her mother. There are numerous versions of this story where Hades made his feelings known to Persephone, and she accepted his proposal. When Demeter returned to see her daughter had disappeared without a trace or even a sign, she was so distraught that she vowed to search night and day, never to rest, for sleep would never bring back Persephone. With aid from the goddess Hecate, whose torches lit the darkness, Demeter was able to search during the night, but sadly to no avail. She eventually transformed herself into an old woman, hoping that disguising her appearance would make the answers that she was looking for easier to come by. During her search for her daughter, she came across the palace of Salius, the king of West Attica. Still in the guise of an old woman, she asked the king for shelter, which he granted on the condition that she nursed his 2 sons, Triptolemus and Demephon. With the search for her daughter momentarily halted, Demeter was finally able to rest, and she wished to repay the king's kindness by making both of his sons immortal. She covered Demephon in ambrosia and placed him in the flames of the hearth, where the boy's mortal self would burn away. But his mother Queen Metanira walked in during this ritual, only to see her son engulfed in flames. She began to scream, assuming her son was dead, and eventually Demeter pulled the boy from the flames before the process was complete. Demephon remained completely unharmed, but he was still very much immortal. Demeter instead chose to show her gratitude by teaching Triptolemus the secrets of agriculture, which he would then teach to the people of his father's kingdom. This story was considered to be one of the earliest explanations as to how humanity learned to plant, grow and harvest grain. Triptolemus was seen by many as Demeter's first priest, the ambassador to humanity. Through him, Demeter's creation of agriculture would be taught to the masses. Soon after leaving the palace, Demeter was told by Hecate that the titan Helios had witnessed the events that took place when Persephone had gone missing, and so she set out to consult with him, where she learnt of her daughter's abduction and the roles played by Hades and Zeus. During the search for her daughter, Demeter abandoned her responsibilities. The seasons halted, crops, flowers and all things living began to die. With food supplies now scarce, humanity began to starve and perish. They prayed to Zeus in the hopes that he could save them, but he could do nothing. The only thing Zeus could do was plead with Demeter to return to her post, but she refused to do so unless Persephone was returned to the land of the living. Now faced with the possibility of all life becoming extinct, Zeus had no choice but to bring his daughter back, and so he sent the messenger of the gods Hermes to retrieve her. Hades agreed that he would return Persephone, but before she left he convinced her to eat a pomegranate, which then bound her to his domain. When Hermes returned with the bad news, Demeter was furious. She made it known to Zeus that if her daughter was not returned, then she would make it so all life would cease to exist, and thus they eventually struck an agreement between them. Persephone would spend a portion of the year in the underworld of Hades, and the rest would be spent on the earth with her mother. This story was often used by the ancient Greeks as a way to explain the different seasons, and there are numerous versions and interpretations, where the duration and the exact time of year Persephone spent in the underworld completely differ. Some like to believe that spring and summer signified Persephone and her mother being reunited, and the unfruitful winter signified her return to Hades. If there is one thing that we do learn from this story, it's how powerful Demeter truly is. The goddess of the harvest isn't one that you would associate a great amount of power with, but you would be wrong. We see that Demeter refusing to perform her duties for a short period of time results in almost the death of everything, and this does become a threat used to ensure the return of Persephone. Zeus being in a position where he's completely powerless isn't one that we see too often in Greek mythology, but in this occasion he is truly helpless and has no other option but to concede to the demands being made. Now some of you may be thinking, how does Demeter have any leverage in this position to begin with? And you can definitely ask the question, why would Zeus care if humanity and all things living died, and how does that affect him negatively? Humanity made up the vast majority of Zeus's worshippers. They were his children, his wives and his many affairs. Demeter not only threatened to destroy those who adored and worshipped Zeus, but also everything that Zeus and his fellow gods had built, and that is why in this scenario he truly has no choice but to concede. So we've briefly gone over some of the consorts and children associated with Demeter, along with some of the popular stories that she appeared in, but we've not really discussed her relationship with the ancient Greek people in any real detail. Demeter was one of the most respected Greek deities, because of how dependent the ancient Greeks were on grain and the harvest. The origins of Demeter's name can be traced back and translated to roughly mean Mother Earth, or the Earth Mother. And if we look at Gaia as the Earth itself, then Demeter's role is very similar to that of a mother, caring and nourishing for the Earth to ensure that it flourishes. The ancient Greeks identified several plants with Demeter, including wheat, mint, and the poppy, which were all considered to be sacred to her, with the poppy even being one of her many symbols. There are some accounts where Demeter is considered to be part of a triple goddess, closely associated to the story of Persephone's abduction. The triple goddess consisted of Hecate, who assumed the role of the wise old crone, Demeter herself, who is the caring mother, and Persephone, who represents the exuberance of youth. We can also interpret the three goddesses as representing the past, present, and future. Unlike her siblings, Demeter did not demand respect, nor did she command fear. Her many cults and the Greek people worshipped her out of appreciation and gratitude for what she provided humanity. Her worship for the most part was done in conjunction with her daughter. Now this daughter was originally Despina, but she was later replaced by Persephone in the years that followed. And this is fairly important because it does highlight some of Demeter's best qualities. She was caring and protective, not only to her children, but also to the ancient Greek people, and that is why they held her in such high esteem. Over the years, humanity faced many hardships and challenges, but Demeter and what she provided proved to be a constant source of reliability and consistency. That is unless you try and take away her daughter, because in that case you'll probably just die of starvation. If you have enjoyed this video and you think it's worth a like, then that would be greatly appreciated, and if you want to subscribe and even hit the notification bell, then all of that stuff really helps the channel. If there was anything mentioned that you'd like to discuss or add to the video, then please feel free to do so in the comments below. As always, I've been your host, Mythology and Penis Cakes Explained.